You're listening and watching Rashkin Report. This is Yuri Rashkin, and I'm excited to welcome back on the program Mikhail Iossel, a writer. I believe you have a new book coming out, Mikhail.
In,
Congratulations.
thank you. In November.
In November, and you also can, dear listeners, you can read Mikhail in the New Yorker from time to time, and it's really exciting to have somebody who has this really unique combination of Russian experience with English speaking, with American experience, and who is able to really fuse these two cultures as well as you have done, Mikhail. It's very impressive. Well, welcome to the program, and let's jump right at it. We have a president who I think to many people makes them think of, I don't know, if not North Korea, at least Soviet Union. How do you see Donald Trump reign over the last year and a half? How it compares to Soviet Union? Is this better, worse, entirely different? How do you see that?
Well, America is not Russia, and Donald Trump is not part of any kind of ideological system. He is just an infantile sociopath, profoundly, endlessly immoral, and also in his infantile way, enamored of strongmen, dictators, and so forth. In his long life, he hasn't spent a single day, I don't think, of honest work, of honest living. So that's the kind of person that now occupies the White House. There is no question; it's far and away the worst person ever to occupy the White House. But it's just not. He's not classifiable in normal human terms. I don't think. I think he's pathological and on so many levels that it's just uh, you really have to be a professional in the field of psychiatry to discuss him seriously. So I don't know how to talk about him. He is a remarkably vile human being, but that may not be entirely his fault. That might be his wiring. But on a more practical level, it would appear uh, well beyond just mere appearance of it that he's been deeply enmeshed in money laundering for the Russians, for the Russian oligarchs, probably owes them considerable amount of money, which probably explains to some extent his obsequiousness towards Putin. Not to mention, of course, each and every one of his visits to Moscow probably was documented very thoroughly, and knowing him, he most certainly, there is no doubt in my mind at least, managed to enmesh himself in something breathtakingly tawdry, because that's what he does here. And there, there would be no limitations whatsoever on his behavior. I cannot just. I'm not even talking about that tape. It's just something that I don't know. Dostoevsky would probably know what to do with him, but I don't. I don't. I just think that it's a remarkable circumstance that a person like that, essentially um, emblematic of everything that is wrong and bad, everything that can go wrong with a human being. That,
Mikhail, if you could explain, I'm trying to kind of wrap my mind around this. You're an incredibly creative person. You are a writer. You tell stories, and yet the concept of or the reality of Donald Trump seems to really bother you. And you are not even in the United States right now. You're a professor at Concordia University, Montreal, Canada. Thank goodness for the miracle of technology. We're speaking to you via Skype when you're in Montreal, and yet and yet this American president bothers you so much. Is it because you don't know what to do with him? Why is it such a disturbance in your life?
well, for one thing, I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'm much more American than I'm Canadian. Um, that's for one thing. Secondly, I think he presents a unique, simply by dint of occupying the office that he occupies, he presents a clear and present danger to not only the United States but to the world at large. That's on the one. And secondly, it's just, yeah, it's some kind of almost kind of mystical, kind of superstitious fascination with a human being that profoundly damaged, that profoundly warped. That might be the writerly component of it, but and also, I came to the United States not as a child, not as a young person. I came at the age of 30, having lived one life, and inevitably, emigres idealize America when they come to that clear alternative to the Soviet Union at an adult age. That idealization can take different forms. Obviously, it can take the form of being in love with Trump, and as well. So it's essentially idealization takes the form of kind of maximalist attitude towards life. But generally, you live and you grow up in the Soviet Union, you know that there is a polar opposite of the Soviet Union, and it's the land of good, essentially. And so Trump is actively trying to destroy the idealized image of America in many people's minds. Essentially, he does everything he can to make people who loved America and love America to temper their attitudes towards America, to stop loving America, because it's an over the top demonstration of everything that's wrong with America and what can go. So that's the personal component of it. On a practical level, it's just a remarkably dangerous phenomenon. Just someone who that breathtakingly unequipped to be the most powerful person in the world occupying that office. It's dangerous, and also clearly in hawk and enthrall of with Putin, whose agenda essentially is to thwart democracy wherever he can find it. So it's a dangerous situation.
You're listening to Rashkin Report. This is Yuri Rashkin. My guest today is writer Mikhail Iossel. Mikhail is also a professor at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, and we're speaking today via Skype. Mikhail, how does your Soviet experience influence you in looking at American politics these days? Are you is this like because this is not Soviet Union? Are you more relaxed because no matter what Trump does, it will not be Soviet Union? Or are you more concerned because you know Soviet Union and what that was like, and you feel like we're marching towards it?
Well, one doesn't need to necessarily have to be a former Soviet citizen to. One can just to see where this potentially might be headed. In his remarkably prophetic book, the Plot Against America, 2004 novel by Philip Roth, he more or less mapped it all out. It's not that complicated. He just started appealing relentlessly to the worst angels of human nature, and you dehumanize people who are not like you, and then it's remarkably easy for a nation, for people to slip off the edge of civilization. Full 30% of all Americans are now basically members of this cult of Trump, who legitimizes something that they had always been told they should be ashamed of. And so he legitimizes the darkness within them, and something that they used to be embarrassed by and ashamed of, and now it's something that they can be proud of. And of course, they will stay with him until the bitter end, because essentially he is the validation of their existence. But as for the Soviet Union, no, it was different there. At some point in your adolescence, maybe 16, 17, somewhere around that time, you start realizing that the country where you live is not necessarily the country of your childhood, because you had a reasonably happy childhood. Then it becomes a matter of trying to find yourself within the system, and it's a rigid system of Soviet existence, and you realize that it's inevitably it's us and them, and that essentially you live in the occupied territory, and it's your country, but it's not yours because nothing there belongs to you, but you do belong to them, chapter and verse, and body and soul. So you live on a borrowed. You live on borrowed time and at their mercy essentially, but you know how to live there. You know that that's such are the rules of the game, and so. But it takes its toll because when you know, and everybody knows, not just you, everybody knows that everything that's being said on the radio and on television is a lie, that all the ideology that doesn't make any sense is a lie, that you still cannot say anything publicly that goes against the grain of that ideology or say anything untoward. You know the rules of the game. You know that you have to raise your hand. You know that you need to keep silent when you need to keep silent. You know, and that leads to predictably to people being angry and depressed and drinking and essentially you just behave like dumbfounded. You're deadened inside. You just walk around and it's just so. That might be the psychological danger of living under Trump, who is constantly overstimulating people's minds with the sheer outrage of his behavior. He is constantly driving the agenda. The sheer venality and ugliness of his being kind of grinds us down. He's manic in a remarkably energetic way. He is relentless. And so he seems to be grinding down lots of people's ability to resist it with any kind of sane arguments. And he piles outrages on top of each other with such tremendous speed that people can't, every new day brings some new outrage, and therefore the one that dominated the day before is forgotten. All of that takes psychological toll. And it's impossible to. People are depressed, and I kind of even wrote about that. Why there was no psychotherapy in the Soviet Union. And
Right.
yeah,
I read that. Yeah.
yeah, there was no psychotherapy because then for a variety of reasons. First off, the party wants to have undivided possession of your subconscious, in which it doesn't believe anyways. You should not supposed to have a subconscious. You have to be transparent in your skull has to be transparent to the party and to other people. That's on the one hand. And then you cannot come to a psychotherapist, like hypothetically even, and say, I'm depressed because I'm lived in a country ruled by degenerates and nothing in this country depends on me, that, I cannot go abroad without asking permission. And even then I cannot do this, I cannot do that. And there are very limited degrees of self-expression there, typically drinking and sex. And so, but everything else you have to ask permission for, and so so you cannot say it to the therapist because you put your therapist in a politically dubious situation. So I kind of wondered if now the people all across the United States are talking with their therapists to a markedly higher degree than before about Trump and about they being depressed about Trump. And I've been getting actually emails and Facebook messages to that post saying that people from therapists, they talk a lot about political situation, about Trump and how to cope with it.
From what I've read, it actually is taking quite a toll on the therapists themselves.
Yeah,
Because when you have so many people complaining about this one particular thing and you live in that situation as well, how do you not become depressed about it
well,
as well?
therapist is the same person as you are, essentially, just living in the same world, and it doesn't know.
They're just supposedly better equipped to handle the problems. And that's my question for you, Professor Iossel. How do you recommend what do you feel is an effective way of resisting? Because so much what we talk about, and it's like hashtag resist. Okay, how you
Well,
resist by writing, I guess.
in the Soviet Union, there were several not many, a handful of very brave people who were called dissidents. And those dissidents were people of direct action. In 1968, they went out, they came out in the Red Square, right, with unfurled this banner, just demanding the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Czechoslovakia. They spent several seconds there, right? They were immediately removed by the cops, by the KGB, and so forth, and all of them got just one jail terms, basically. There were people who tried to be in direct opposition to the regime. The regime actually probably welcomed that because it just kept it on its toes, and it was not a competition. But the absolute majority of people, well, the absolute majority of people in the Soviet Union resisted simply by not participating in life, by just drinking themselves to death, by just essentially by removing. Nothing depends on you, so you just withdraw. So there was a term, of course, internal emigre. An internal emigre is someone who does not participate, who pretends that he or she does not live in this country. Well, willy-nilly you have to deal with it, but to the extent that you can, you pretend that you do not live here. You just live, just float in timeless space somehow, to the extent that you can. And that means that you cannot ask for anything, because, again, you have to ask for anything at all in your life, right? You want to move from one apartment to the next. It's a very arduous process. You know, you deal with the state every step of the way. But to the extent that some people would move from big cities to to the woods and live in log cabins and so forth. I think that inevitably here, lots of people get emotionally exhausted and also withdraw. It's not coincidence that relatively few people actually express themselves on a daily basis on Facebook, write about politics, because it's kind of useless, and because it's an expenditure of your own emotional capital somehow, just which other people tend to reserve for, their family life, for other pursuits in their life. It's just, but we do what we do because we want to do it and because we feel that we need to do it. So speaking up is important, but when Trump oversteps too egregiously and gratuitously, like in the case with these kids, right? It was a very important moment. I think it was the first time that he was delivered a very, very direct and highly conspicuous setback. He was defeated. He stepped back, and so yesterday also I watched a live stream from LaGuardia, where there are thousands, hundreds of people certainly trying to, waiting for the flights that were supposed to bring those kids right to New York. When people resist in a variety of ways, people organize marches, but ultimate degree of resistance would be, of course, ultimate measure of resistance would be in November, when it will be clear how well people have managed to preserve their anger, and will they stay just as motivated as they are now, or have been recently, to go and because once you outvote Trumpland, you basically start the unraveling of Trump presidency, in my opinion. So that's how you resist. This is still America, This is not Russia. And people, even denizens of Trumpland, there are certain red lines that they don't want to overstep, like abusing children, for instance. They would prefer not to believe it. That's their reaction.
Well, it just looks horrible.
Yeah, but also everybody has children, or everybody can relate.
Even Trump has kids. That's true.
Yeah, but he's a sociopath, so he's incapable of feeling. But most people are not sociopaths, but they want to believe Trump, so they have to disbelieve Uh, that's why they didn't believe those reports, just that it's all the media and so forth. So,
Mikhail, I'd like to ask you your take on the First Lady. I think a lot of people will say that it is not fair to criticize her. She's not an elected official. She's just the wife of the president. She tries, she's doing her best, she has good intentions. She speaks with an accent. Well, so what? Who doesn't? Why is she being under attack so much? Do you feel that criticisms of Melania Trump are warranted in any way, or is it fair to look at her as a regular person, not as an elected official, therefore not warranting the same level of scrutiny?
I don't know. To the extent that she engages herself over the last several decades, first ladies were active. They took on certain causes that they pursued and they promulgated and so forth. So inevitably, she is an enabler, as it were. She's there. She has unparalleled access to the president, and so she can provide. But I just posted some just 15 minutes ago or 5 minutes ago that she went to see those kids that her husband kidnapped wearing a Zara jacket that says, I don't
I don't,
care.
I don't care.
It's like I said, yeah, next time you go, precisely, next time you go, you have an audience with the Pope, don't wear that Satan t-shirt that you like so much. Just or even Metallica t-shirt. You don't.
Yeah, so there's just some bad judgment, I suppose, on top of everything.
I think what people sense about her is that, well, I think sorry. I think that people feel sorry for her to some extent because who would want to be married to Donald Trump, and but also and because it's endless humiliation with all his affairs and porn stars and so forth. Uh, Also, he's a horrible person, and so people feel sorry for her, but also not really because people suspect that she married him for his money. And because how did she fall in love with him? How do you fall in love with Donald Trump? So that, and people sense that she is fake, that she's fake, that she's insincere. Who the hell knows? I don't know. I don't think of her much. I sympathize with her to some extent because she's probably an introvert who has to live with the worst person in America. It's difficult, I would imagine. But then again, that she nobody forced her to wear this idiotic jacket. How do you do this? I mean, are you that stupid? Yes.
Well,
So
there should be, she has, I think, a staff of people. Somebody could have pointed out to her that perhaps this was inappropriate. Or
yeah,
then again. You're
yeah.
listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. Today, my guest, and we're speaking with a writer and professor at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, Mikhail Iossel, and we're speaking about, I guess we're speaking about our political leadership. But Mikhail also brings a unique, that Soviet experience, and that's kind of where I'd like to take the conversation now, in a sense that, of course, it is Russian Federation now, and not Soviet Union at all, and it is so very different, or is it? Do you feel that it seems like the levels of alcoholism are pretty much back to where they've been in Soviet times? It seems people just continue to solve their problems and the hopelessness through alcohol, if that's any indication of similarities between the regimes. And of course, you have now private enterprise, and you don't have the kolkhoz and then everything being run by state. But then again, perhaps this is even cheaper for the people in charge because they don't have to worry about taking care of anybody like in Soviet Union times where the government was charged with taking care of citizens. Now they don't even have to do that. It's like the difference from slavery to capitalism. Capitalism is actually cheaper. You don't have to take care of these people so much. So do you feel that the situation is much improved
By comparison with what?
with the country that you left? You have been going back and forth. You're kind of seeing some of the changes.
Well, I haven't been there for in a while actually,
All
but
right.
uh, but
You know, there's World Cup going on right now. It's a big celebration. Life is great. I understand jails are being painted on the inside, you know, and all the cops are going around smiling however they can to be nice to all the world visitors. Is that is are we, you know, and I guess where that goes is we have sanctions against this country. We consider Russia to be a threat to our national security. Justly, or is this not just because it is not Soviet Union and therefore?
um, people are drinking again because again they nothing depends on them, and their lives are not their own. In that sense, it's the old Soviet Union. Basically, it's social lifts, so-called. They do not work. It's not, and people sense that it's not really Russia. It's Gas and Oil Corporation Russia, and it's a mafia structure. And at the head of that mafia structure is a former KGB colonel, and it's a country that is it's in the sense, obviously it's like Soviet Union, only you can leave now, and Putin figure it out very simply. You don't uh, keep people inside the country. You don't forbid them from saying anything because it doesn't matter. It's a thoroughly postmodernist world. Nobody cares what you say. You can say whatever you want. It's not going to change anything. As you know, just as we are seeing actually watching the discourse, the political discourse in the United States, people simply want to confirmation of their views. So they watch Fox News or they watch MSNBC, and those worlds do not intersect. And same in Russia. Somehow, if there is one success of Putin's rule, and it's now a country in desperate economic situation. When he accepted the country in 1999, it was a hopeful country open to the West with corporations that were poised to cooperate with Western corporation. There was clear perspective for Russia. Right now, it's a downtrodden, dispirited, despondent country balancing on the brink of economic collapse, and that's Putin's doing. Putin and his whole merry bunch of multi-billionaires, thieves, mega thieves. But he also has parallel projects going on the side, and that is to say, to destroy democracy everywhere, because that somehow would justify his existence at the helm of Russia. If, like I said, if he has been successful at anything during his rule, which by now has exceeded Brezhnev's in length, it's in poisoning Russia's bloodstream with cynicism to the extent that I don't even know how Russia will ever detoxify itself, and I don't think it will. Actually, I think Russia is not going to survive. I think it's going to fall apart into a number of states somewhere in the next 10 years or 15 years. But what he did, he poisoned Russia's bloodstream to the extent with cynicism that is absolutely stunning. And that's the source of anti-Americanism, anti-Western sentiment, and so forth. Basically, they're no better than us, but they pretend that they're better than us. There is no people generally are not good. Politicians, by definition, are ugly people. Everybody, you think, yes, we know that our leaders are thieves. We know. But you want to say that your former president like Obama was not a billionaire? He was not stealing? Well, if you think that only means that you're stupid, because we know, we're not afraid, we're more honest than you. We know this about our leaders, but your media doesn't write about that your politicians also are multi-billionaires and so forth. So that's the source of anti-Americanism: envy, resentment, and general meaninglessness. Russia doesn't have a project, doesn't have a unifying idea, doesn't have a raison d'etre, doesn't like, not even like America's pursuit of happiness, like life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Russia doesn't have that. It's just, people suck. That's Russia's motto. People
So,
suck.
so is down the road, perhaps historically, Putin's time is going to be viewed as like the collapse of Rome that took several hundred years, but that was the collapse of the Roman Empire. Is Putin kind of presiding over the collapse of Russia?
Well, Russia, I mean, we don't live in historical time. We live in the time of our own lives, and it's very different from.
It's a disadvantage. I'll give you that.
Yeah, yeah. So who knows how much longer it's going to take and how he's going to be viewed. What it's going to be viewed is a country that failed to face its own history and was doomed by its own fear to look in the face of its own history because it was just so ugly. It's stunning that a representative of the KGB and that nobody saw much wrong with the fact that the representative organization had killed tens of millions of people for nothing and never repented. So there was never a reckoning. And Putin is proud to have been a KGB, and there is never such thing as former KGB person. So there has not been a reckoning with its own history. It's the same as like in Germany, just somebody who would be like deeply proud that his father was, SS colonel.
But Germans, okay, this is like a perennial conversation. Can a country recover from ideological collapse without an invasion from outside? Because even Nazi Germany was invaded by Allied forces, and that caused the outcome, and that caused the denazification. Russia was not successfully invaded by anyone, nor do I wish an invasion on any country. Well, at least, not anyway.
Yeah.
So, is it possible to overcome, or I guess, like you said, you don't believe that it can? Is it partially because Russia is not invadable and it has to do it by itself, and therefore it won't and it can't?
Well, Nazi Germany was not invaded first. The logic of Nazi regime was in endless expansion by means of war.
Okay.
The Nazis attacked first, right?
Right, absolutely. But in the end, there were people from other forces on their land.
Yeah, but that is not necessary anymore.
Okay.
That is just, technologically, that's not necessary. What I think is happening with Russia now is just rotting from the inside, and it becomes unsustainable. I don't know how much the country can learn from. Somebody has to come along at some point and say to people that our history has been horrible and we must face it. But it hasn't been done. In Germany, it was done, but it wasn't. It has never been done in Russia. And
what politician, by definition, can do that? Politicians are supposed to, in public understanding, tell people whatever the most horrible news, but in the best possible language.
Yeah.
And otherwise, who will follow? But we'll see.
Well, there are times when people get tired of being worse than themselves, and then there is a need for someone who would the country that's poisoned by lies and poisoned by cynicism at some point might want to have a dose of truth also, injected in its bloodstream, and then there will be a demand for someone who is speaking the truth, because people will become nauseated of their own existence and the degree of of falsity of their lives, of just something. I don't know how it's going to happen, but if it doesn't happen, Russia doesn't stand a chance.
So that the pendulum of cynicism, the pendulum is going to swing from cynicism to more honest conversation at some point.
If it swings back, because sometimes the pendulum can just fly off the axis and nothing will happen. It may well be that Russia has been taken beyond the point of no return, because the history has delivered, or it's committed too many sins against history, or history has decided to punish it, because country cannot go through the 20th century that Russia had and not reckon with it. It's inconceivable. It's inconceivable that there are thousands of people and more now, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands who are again deifying Stalin. It's just it's almost paganistic. Like people just bringing flowers to the monument to somebody who killed millions of them. It's just it's like angry God who hates them and they're afraid of him, and but they're afraid of themselves essentially. So, yeah.
Mikhail, I'd like to kind of wrap this up by bringing it together, the Russian side and the American side. And the way I'd like to do that is in Russia, there is a kind of like a developed language of how to counter any sort of criticism of Russia. Like, you are an immigrant, therefore you cannot speak about Russia. You are this kind of person, and therefore you cannot speak about Russia. And kind of taking away this right to criticize from anybody based on whatever premise you need to come up with. But nobody has a right to criticize Russia, apparently. And at the same time, as you said, the gates, the borders are open right now. And therefore, if you're not happy, well, get out. And now we look at the United States, where we're starting to see kind of a developing of the same mindset where if you're not happy, well, get out. But, and there you are sitting in Canada criticizing and speaking your mind. How do you square all of these away in a sense that who has a right to criticize? Does anybody not have a right to criticize? Or is this like everybody is actually right to criticize? Because why should we listen to a mafia regime in Russia say anything? It's just propaganda. Anybody can criticize. Or are there some boundaries? What do you think?
Boundaries are defined by one's frame of reference. I mean, what's the point of anybody can criticize Russia without knowing where Russia is or or knowing anything about Russia? It's just my cat sleeping here. Could criticize Russia. It's like the value of that would be low. Uh, I wouldn't, like I said, I would not be speaking volubly about the situation in the United States if I hadn't been a U.S. citizen. I don't think it's appropriate. I wouldn't have been talking about the situation in Russia if I wasn't born and spent the first 30 years of my life there, and then kept returning there and so forth. I still feel that that's my country to some extent, even though I'm not a citizen. But I have
So is it
my
about being a stakeholder?
yeah, emotional stakeholder, and you have to know why you are speaking about this. You have to know, and other people should understand your reasons. I think that people would object about your motives if they don't see how you participate. What's your stake in this? So I don't care if they say like, "Oh, you're an immigrant, and so what do you know?" I know enough, and I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying things that seem right from my perspective. And if you're touchy, well, too bad. But read Dostoevsky. That's the Russian. But and same with the United States. Everybody who it's important that people care, and so if they care, then they should speak their mind. It's the American way. It's the American way. Everybody has the right to speak, but it would be good to know that you know what you're talking about. That's basically it. Yeah. But the right to criticize. I mean, come on. Everybody has the right to say whatever they want to say. It's just that the value of your statements might be low if you don't have the right frame of reference. If you're just shooting the breeze, if you're just blabbering away. But if you know what you're talking about, and you should know about yourself whether you belong in this conversation or not. I think so. If you develop, that's why I limit myself primarily to the United States, and I could be talking about any number of subjects, but I just don't feel that I've earned the right to speak about that from my own perspective. And
You
that's it.
listen. You're listening to Rashkin Report. This is Yuri Rashkin. My guest today was Mikhail Iossel, professor of Concordia University in Montreal, and writer. Mikhail, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you. It was a good conversation. Thank you, Yuri.
Thank you.
You're listening to Rashkin Report.